Welcome to the Peer 150 PDX webinar series. I am Mike Kaiser, co-founder of the Peer 150, and today I'm joined by Jarek Conrad, Senior Director, Human Insights and HCM Evangelism at UKG. Thank you, Jarek, for joining us today.
Glad to be here, Mike.
Before we get started, just a few housekeeping notes. We have the PDXYZ. It's an event that we launched in 2019, and actually Jarek was a scheduled participant this year to be on the agenda. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic, we weren't able to run the event, but we do have it scheduled for 2021, August 3rd, 4th, and 5th. So please go out to our website and take a look for the details as they become available. Speaking of the website, you can go to thepeer150.com, click on the virtual programs tab, as well as some of the in-person tabs for 2021. And through the virtual programs, you can see all of the past and present webinars that we've had. And there's recordings out there if you missed one. And this session will be recorded as well and posted on there post-session. Also, just a couple other events coming up. We are having our member appreciation event, recognition night, December. Member recognition, we're going to have some CHRO Jeopardy, a lot of fun. We'll have some prizes associated with that. Special guest speakers, comedians, live music. It's a great time, and it's kind of targeted to thank all the folks that have helped make the Peer 150 possible, as well as continue us through the pandemic and into the future of 2021. So again, go out to the website and take a look at details as those become available. We also are running our virtual regional series. This is a series that we launched at the end of this year. It's been fantastic. These are using the Zoom meetings platform, so it's interactive. We've had anywhere from 50 to 100 folks show up for these sessions. It's a great way to get some thought leadership with folks in your region. Even though they are regionally focused, they are not exclusive to the region. So if you have an event you'd like to get to, whether it's in your region or not, please go out to our website and sign up for those. Again, great sessions. We're really looking forward to running these in the upcoming year. And finally, just to thank our sponsors, UKG, they've been a supporter of the Peer 150 since we began. Thank you so much for your continued support, Jarek. Thank you for your continued support of the group. Without you, we couldn't have kept this thing going through this pandemic and into 2021. So we really appreciate your support and really appreciate your support of the Peer 150 members and the thought leadership concepts that we have. Thank you very much.
Happy to do it, no problem.
Also like to thank First Tech Credit Union. Again, they have been a fantastic supporter of us through this virtual series that we put together. Thank you so much for your continued support, and we look forward to working with you in 2021 as well. And then finally, just a few housekeeping notes on the platform. If you'd like to ask Jarek a question, please use the Q&A section. I will be monitoring that Q&A, and we will get to as many of those questions as we can as we go along. So thank you again, Jarek, for joining us. And just to give a little introduction of the folks that may not have seen you the first time, we talked way back in May. It seems like forever ago, right? But for folks that didn't happen to catch you then, could you just give a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your background?
Sure. As you mentioned, I lead the Human Insights and HCM Evangelism group at UKG. I have over 20 years experience in HR, so I'm a recovering HR professional. Really the role that I play at UKG is leading this thought leadership group. And so we're always thinking about the future of work, the future of human resources, what types of trends are we seeing that we need to be prepared for. So I'm either presenting something or researching something or writing about the things that I'm presenting and researching and interacting with. So that's the primary role, but I'm still kind of an HR person at heart.
Well, that's good. So, it was interesting. I went back, and we were talking a little bit earlier, I went back and looked at our interview in May, and a lot of the perspectives were a lot of the unknowns that we had, right? And so, fast forwarding 6 months now, and we have a little bit more insight to what the world looks like and what the workplace looks like and those kinds of things. But just wanted to get your perspectives. We talked early May, and so that was maybe, 2 months into the pandemic.
Yeah.
I think at that point, we all thought, hey, this isn't necessarily a sprint, but I don't know that we knew it was a marathon like we're seeing as well, as somewhere in
Right.
between.
Right. Right.
So can you just talk about, kind of from a high level, what are your perspectives on where we were at then and what we thought? And, where are we at now as far as challenges with HR executives, with what you see coming either currently or maybe in the next 3 to 6 months?
It's been a really interesting ride, because we've had times where things look like they were getting better and then we spike, and then it looks like it gets better and then spike. So we've still been in this constant state of uncertainty. And I think, obviously the recent news about the vaccinations that may be available a lot quicker than some people were predicting is very, very good news. And it's some light at the end of the tunnel. So I think we're all starting to think about, okay, now we can start to say at some point, we may be going back to the office, et cetera. So I think people are now putting together plans for, maybe in the fall we might be okay. But there's still, there's still some uncertainty because you know we still have to figure out, okay, well, who's going back to the office? Or now if people are working from home, some people are saying, look, I've always wanted to live in city XYZ. Now that my spouse and myself both work remotely, we can live in city XYZ. I mean, there's lots of things that are happening with people that are that we're going to have to understand what the implications are from a workplace standpoint. I like to think about the psychology and the I mean, in the neuroscience of all this, and then apply that stuff to sociology. What we're seeing out there in the world, and I think it's still uncertainty there. We don't necessarily know what the long term impact of this isolation is going to be. We don't know what it's going to be for our kids. We don't know what it's going to be for our employees. We might not know for 5, 6, 7, 10 years down the road. We may not fully understand the scope of this for businesses that are trying to recover, if they can stay afloat. When do they get back to some kind of comfort level? So unfortunately, we're still in it. One positive, though, if you can pull anything positive out of all this, is that there is now a growing chorus of people saying, look, things might not have been as great as we thought they were pre-pandemic, pre-George Floyd, pre-natural disasters that we've experienced with all these named storms and fires in California and all that. All this devastation and destruction. Some of this stuff there was already an undercurrent of it, and the pandemic helped to highlight it, to help accelerate it. And so maybe one good news story long term might be that we're confronting some of these things today that there was really no precipitating event that made us confront them in the past. So we're having some hard conversations about the way we did things. And when we rebuild and we re-emerge, do we really want to re-emerge the way we were in the past? And I think for most of us, the answer is no. No, this is a time to stop and think about how we do some things differently.
Yeah, to your point, I think the awareness for things like, remote work and social type issues and social justice things, I think you're exactly right. The awareness that, this incident or the incidents that have happened in 2020 have certainly brought that to light. One of the things when I went back and looked at our conversation before, you talked a lot about the tribal nature of people and how we tend to run with our pack, right? We want to be around people like us, and we tend to do that. And that creates a lot of segregation and separation between people. Which obviously affects the sense of belonging. What's your assessment of, I've heard a lot of conversations with HR executives talking about, hey, when this first started, people kind of banded together, Zoom came out, or, Microsoft, or, whatever the connection points were virtually. And, we got to see people's homes and children and dogs and things like that. And so, people felt like the connection was maybe better. And now I've heard more recently there's Zoom fatigue, and, when nobody wants to be on camera anymore. What's your sense of, kind of where we're at with a sense of belonging? Has that deteriorated since we talked earlier? Do you see it being better, or is it somewhere in between?
Well, and as with most questions, I think the answer is somewhere in between, right? For some people, this has been great. in terms, of course, not the sickness and, all that stuff associated with it, but some people, this work arrangement has been great. I don't have to commute anymore. I can just, I have access to my device whenever I need to. I'm much more productive. Um, some people are more introvert and, I don't have to be around so many people as much, except, I mean, for some people in their work style or personality style, they've been pleasantly surprised by how much they can get into a groove with remote working. For some people, they absolutely hate it. I gotta be able to touch people. I need to be able to just be next to you like that. I feel part of me is missing. So, for some people, they're gonna feel more isolated. This is much more of a challenge for them. It's exhausting for them. It's isolating for them. It's gonna be more of a challenge. But I think as HR professionals, we have got to get tighter on the people sciences. Like we have to start to understand the psychology, neuroscience, all these things that make us tick. And the challenge is we got to start to understand those on a more individual level, right? So we can no longer say our employees do X, Y, Z because we got a diverse group of employees with, diverse needs and perspectives. So to the extent that we can meet people where they are and offer opportunities for them to work in a fashion that they feel best suits, where they are at a given time, I think that's where our sweet spot is going to be. So I hope that HR people are sitting down thinking about that. When we go back, how do we go back in a way that can feel somewhat customized for our employees and not force, kind of a one size fits all approach to not just going back to the office, but how we do work. I think that's our biggest challenge, and it is our biggest opportunity because if we do it right, we'll have people who are more engaged and doing what they like to do when they like to do it, and it's a win-win across the board.
Yeah, and the other thing is you're talking that when we talk about when we talked earlier and today's world and HR executives dealing with all the things out there is when we talked, it was before the George Floyd incident and the social movement, that happened. That obviously has affected a lot of HR executives within their organization about the types of conversations that need to happen, the DE&I initiatives, which is what this conversation will kind of work its way into. But
Yeah.
just your perspective on that incident and how it's affected organizations. What has been the effect of that? Good and bad, and maybe what are some of the challenges that folks were facing because of that?
I mean, it seems like almost a lifetime ago that this happened. And we are so, I think people have gotten so attuned to what the next news cycle is. It's hard to keep our attention. I'm already finding people backlash with people. I don't really want to talk about race, et cetera. I'm like, man, this wasn't, it was just a few months ago. We were like, hey, we got to talk about race. We stand with the Black community. And so we have to work hard to make sure that we keep this on the radar screen, that it shouldn't take another incident like the George Floyd incident for us to step back and think about, what's going on. So I think it's been interesting. Obviously, when this first happened, you had a lot of people, lots of organizations reacted to it. Whether it was authentic or not, it depends on the organization, right? But organizations overall started to acknowledge some things that they had been reluctant to acknowledge before. And I guess it's because if everybody else is saying it, I've been thinking it, but I didn't want to say it. But now everybody else is saying it, so I'll go ahead and say it. But what we got to make sure we see is the follow through. I do get alerts, on LinkedIn or something like that. Congratulations to so and so and so has just been named the Chief Diversity Officer for XYZ Corporation. So we are seeing, those kind of jobs emerging and organizations saying we're going to take this seriously. But what I don't know yet, because I'm not, I'm home, I interact like this. I'm not out on the street in organizations as much as I might have been in the past. What I don't know is how many organizations have real plans, real specific plans with metrics associated with those plans around, okay, we're going to make these changes and we're going to make these changes by this time. That I'm not sure of at this point. Certainly, I believe some organizations are like, we got to take this seriously. And especially those organizations who already knew we had some challenges. I think they're saying, look, we don't have the luxury of waiting forever for this to happen. This has got to happen now. But I am, I'm fearful that, this is going to be across the board. And while I'm optimistic that we'll see some significant structural changes, I'm not completely confident that we will do so, because I'm not completely confident that people understand the issues. I mean, we saw the George Floyd incident, but it's not those incidents that are causing the most problems as we're trying to address this stuff. It's the more subtle things. It's the stuff between here and somebody's dead. Well, there's a lot of stuff that happens in here, and we still have differences in perceptions around. We see the same thing, but we still interpret them in different ways. So we're not quite where I would hope we would be across different groups in terms of those more subtle things.
Yeah, and you brought up a lot of points I want to get to. But before we get too far into it, one of the things that you had mentioned was, and we talked a little bit about it last time, it's kind of the short-term decisions that you make based on immediate perceived threats versus the long-term effect of that, right? And I think kind of what you're saying was that, I've seen it a little bit in the discussions and, talking with HR executives about their DE&I initiatives. In the summer when it was a hot topic, everybody had an urgency to create some sort of strategy or do something to address the issue. And, that's sort of faded a little bit in a lot of ways. And I think there's a lot of executives that don't really know what do I do, take that first step. I'm coming into 2021, it's an issue, I want to deal with it, but what do I do? So kind of two parts to this question is, one is, how do you keep the momentum going? How do you keep that within your organization, keep that conversation going? What are some tricks maybe? And then secondly, what is the first step that an HR executive should do? What is the one thing that they should focus on, or one or two things they should focus on?
Yeah. So maybe I'll answer the second question first, and then you'll have to help me remember the first question.
Gotcha.
So the second question, in terms of HR professionals, I mean, we got to understand this stuff. I think there's often, people are, people want to get things done, right? People have this orientation of accomplishing things and checking a box and, but this is one of those things that I think instead of stepping forward, first, you got to step backwards. And so step back to really understand where we are, understand why people feel the way they feel, understand the things that are going on outside of your organization. You can't just be focused in in the walls of your organization. You need to understand, I think, how housing discrimination, how not just employment discrimination, but, educational disparities, health disparities, how do all those things come together to create the situation that we're in now? Because your customers experience this, your employees experience this. They bring all these things with them to work every day. And so stepping outside of, again, just the traditional walls of an organization to understand the systems and structures, I think is critically important, because once you have a better handle, then it's easier to know, okay, what can I control now within my organization? I mean, that's one of the biggest things. I might have mentioned last time, Mike, when I used to do, whenever I ran my own business, I used to do some consulting and training around diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging. And I'd go into organizations and, they want, what can we do? How do we fix it? And I would always say, well, let's understand it more. And they did not want to invest the time to go back to talk about stuff like the Black codes and Jim Crow laws. Like, what does that have to do with us today? Well, it has a lot to do with us today. It has to do with why our communities are still segregated the way they do. It has to do with the wealth disparities and the educational challenges that we still have. It has a lot to do with what we're experiencing today. So that's one thing. Invest the time to really understand the complexity of the issue. So you can be not reactive, but you can be more proactive. So that's the second thing. The first question was, of course, I told you I was going to forget the first question.
Yeah, it's how do you keep the momentum going with what you might have felt in summer versus what's happening today?
Yeah. So I think you just got to be intentional about that. I know at UKG we have some ongoing conversations with the entire marketing team where we talk about these issues. I mean, employees can send in questions that they have. We have a panel of people, the panel rotates, and we have an ongoing dialogue about these issues. So finding a way to have an ongoing dialogue. If you have ERG groups, employee resource groups, or affinity groups or communities of interest, whatever you may call them, engaging them in some ongoing dialogue, I think is really, really important. Here's the other thing. Partly, I think people think about this whole issue of diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging as this touchy-feely kind of, let's all hold hands and, sing Kumbaya and empathize with each other and talk about how much we really have in common. And all that's fine. But the reality is, I feel like people need to bring the same tools that they bring to solve other operational issues in their organization. So they do detailed analysis, they have a problem-solving approach, and they have metrics in place, and they hold people accountable for those metrics. I mean, the same way you solve other problems related to your business, you got to bring that same framework to solving this problem, which means then your managers have to be held accountable for this. Your HR team has to be held accountable for helping the managers get the pool of candidates they need. Our policies and practices have to be fair and equitable, and we have to have a way to measure that. So again, I think that this has to be integrated into everything that you do, because it's a component of everything that deals with people in your organization. So that's how you keep the momentum going. We can't talk about people without talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, because people are diverse.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point, and it's actually something I hear quite a bit in talking with executives is, it's the idea of, I want a diverse strategy within my organization. And, a lot of it feels like, well, it's the right thing to do, right? But when it really comes down to an organization, it really has to be good business. And I think that's sort of what you alluded to there, is when you have metrics and you can prove or you can show that this is good business by having a diverse workforce, different ideas, different thoughts, our productivity is higher, whatever it might be. Can you talk a little bit about what are some of the things that HR executives can use in that toolkit as far as showing that this is good business, this is going to help us financially or within our organization down the road, not just, hey, it's the right thing to do, because a lot of organizations, even though they would like to do that, that's not sustainable sometimes, right? It's great for a 3-month period, and then they go back to, hey, let's do it our old way, because that's how we make money and that's how we are successful.
Yeah. Mike, I have really mixed feelings about this. So part of me says, look, I can show you, if we go through this education process, I can show you how certain people have gotten systemically left out of, various aspects of quality of life in America. They've been systemically and intentionally treated poorly, or unintentionally treated poorly. Part of me says it's a shame that we have to say, well, it makes good business sense to stop doing that. I mean, from a human level, do we value humanity or not? So it's these bigger pictures, like, why are you here? What kind of contributions are you making? These bigger questions that some people, they don't answer until they're laying, on the bed in the hospital if they've had a stroke or something like that, right? Don't wait until that happens for you to sit back and reflect on that if you're a CEO or, another C-suite executive. So, part of this is that we've had structures and systems that have created where we are today, right? That's how we got here. So that ought to be enough, right? But I realize, to your point, that for some people that's not enough. So you can certainly bring in the return on investment from a business standpoint. There are lots of studies that demonstrate that having more diversity, trying to solve a problem, it's more likely to yield better results. And it's common sense. If we have more perspectives looking at the problem, it might take us longer to solve it, but we might come up with a more optimal solution, right? The other thing is that you might not have a choice, because what we're seeing now is that customers and employees and prospective employees are starting to demand it. So people in interviews are like, tell me about your diversity strategy. What is diversity, the diversity of your company? And not just, Black and Hispanic and women, white guys are asking this too, who want to be in organizations that are diverse, right? So in some ways, there are some external pressures and demands that organizations are having to, if you want to continue to attract talent, if you want to continue to have loyal customers, um, people are they're going online and they're looking at how did these people act during the pandemic? What kind of corporate citizen have they been? What kind of programs around diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging do they have? What do their numbers look like? Is this a place for me? Can I be successful at this place? So I think there's some pressures there. So it's going to make it makes business sense in terms of solving problems. It makes business sense in terms of what your customers and your employees are expecting. But look, maybe I'm just too optimistic, but I want to believe in the good in people, and I don't know that people realize that we're not just talking about slavery. We're not just talking about what happened in the 1800s. I don't know that everybody understands, number one, the legacy of those things that happened early on and the current stuff. I mean, I can do a 2-hour presentation on just 2019 and 2020 in housing, in healthcare, in employment, in education. And I can show disparities, across the board just in 2019 and 2020 in terms of how people have been treated and shut out of opportunities. So I think that part, maybe people don't realize as much. And I think a lot of people, if they knew the extent of some of these things that people experience, they want to change.
Yeah, I think that's a great perspective, and I do think sometimes, when you talk about the tribal nature and, the what's there right now of my threats, I think that's where sometimes people get into, hey, I've got to do this today, but it doesn't necessarily last. And I think your perspectives are spot on. And, when we talked earlier too, when you look at everything an HR executive has dealt with in maybe the last 6 to 8 months, we've got remote work, like I mentioned, a lot of these kinds of issues that you brought up, which are not necessarily, they're organizational issues, but they're also societal issues, right? And an HR executive is, responsible for solving those within their organization.
Yeah.
You talked about a chance for an HR executive to rebrand itself, whether that be within their organization or as an individual themselves. Can you talk a little bit about what does that mean, and where should the focus be when somebody's looking at, hey, I've got maybe a new opportunity here with my role within this organization or my role as a professional?
Yeah, it's been, I think over the course of my whole career in HR, we've had this discussion about changes that need to be made. I mean, the reality now is that if you look at, recent statistics, um, prior to the pandemic, HR was like the Rodney Dangerfield of corporate America in some ways, right? We just got no respect. In fact, many CEOs were going outside of the traditional HR function to bring in CHROs who didn't necessarily have HR experience, but they had operational experience. And I think that's unfortunate because there are so many talented HR professionals who are looking for that opportunity to deliver, a higher level of value. So I think we got to kind of put to rest some of the debates that we've had. One of the debate is, am I a business advocate? Do I represent the business or am I an employee advocate? And we're starting to realize now that those are not two separate things altogether. The reality is, if we put our people first, right? Our tagline, our purpose is people. If we put our people first, focus on them, how to get them, engaged and feeling good about who they are and what they're doing, they're going to take care of our customers. And when they take care of our customers, that's going to take care of our business, right? So I'm a business advocate if I'm doing the right thing by people. So those are not mutually exclusive. The other thing is, this is the big one, is HR tactical or is it strategic? The reality is we've had people trying to dip their toes in both. And while all of our jobs require some level of that combination, the reality of there are some people who have the kind of brain processes, the structures and the work that they enjoy, that they belong more in, these human operations kind of areas where it is a little bit more tactical. It is a little bit more of the compliance, the day-to-day kind of things, and thinking about how to automate that stuff. And somebody still got to manage that automation and all that. All that is a completely separate skill set than when I talk about a people scientist. These are people that are thinking about sociology, anthropology, neuroscience, all these things and what makes us tick. And how do we develop programs and initiatives and interventions that get at that? Those are two separate skill sets, and we need to be clear about that and have people do what it is they need to do to be fulfilled and to deliver the type of value that we need. So I think that's important. The other thing is we got to step up into modern life. I mean, HR professional, we still use some antiquated terms. Our industry is the human capital management. When you think about human capital, it almost sounds like you're a widget. I can bring you in, use you, for as much as I can get out of you, and then I can toss you away. You're there for my own use, right? So a lot of our, even human resources may be an outdated term, a human resource, this resource that we can rely on. So we need to rethink, who we are, what our role is, and maybe there needs to be a little bit of a marketing campaign, on top of this for people to understand that. I just think of my career, there were just people who had a different focus on what they thought their value should be. And the reality is the tactical stuff, the compliance stuff, that stuff is important. You can get sued, right? The operation is not as efficient as it can be if you're not doing that stuff right. Great value in that stuff. I don't want to do it. I'm gonna do it poorly if you put me running that kind of a function. I need to be over here because this is the stuff that gets me going.
Thanks, Jerry. And there's a question that came in that I think relates a little bit to the branding, and you mentioned the authentic, authentic piece of an organization. The questions around, if you're trying to be authentic and you're trying to support your employees to be authentic in the workplace, that may or may not fit with what somebody else's interpretation of what is appropriate in the workplace or what is authentic in the workplace. For example, the examples brought up was, I have an accountant that wants to be very creative. Well, the accounting isn't a creative job, right? And so you have to limit, maybe what they can do or how creative they can be. Or, one of the other examples was around grooming. You have somebody that wants to just come in and wear whatever they want and doesn't want to shower or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And that may not be okay, but hey, it's authentic. And so, but the point is, I think there's a lot of executives out there right now that are dealing with, or, the example of, I've heard a lot of, conversations that typically weren't encouraged or allowed in the workplace. Now there's people that want that, right? They want to see, hey, how authentic is my organization and how willing are they to have these conversations? And it's really great to open up that maybe Pandora's box a little bit, but there's also reasons why those things were in place before some of these things, right? So what's your advice to executives about those kinds of things where you're trying to be authentic in your work environment, you're trying to support your individual employees, but you do have a responsibility to the organization and everybody else within the organization to make sure it's a positive work environment.
And Mike, I'm sure you didn't intend to do this, but you just gave me some flashbacks to some of my old experiences, getting in the weeds and some of those issues in organizations. So I got to get that stuff out of my head here. I got to recover. I think it might not be as hard as we might think. I think the key is establishing your values. Every organization has these core values, and oftentimes it's a consultant that comes in, or you sit around in a room for a couple of days, and you put together something on paper that sounds good, et cetera. But if people are serious about what those core values are, and if they truly represent how we operate on a day-to-day basis, if this is the criteria we use for the decisions that we make, then those other kinds of things become pretty easy. So if you're someone who feels like I can wear whatever, I can, wear offensive clothing, I can do whatever it is, you got to look at our core values. And if that is, contrary to our core values, if we don't want you wearing stuff that is going to traumatize, other people in the organization, maybe that's not consistent with our core values. So this might not be the right organization for you. So I think understanding what your core values are helps establish, it's baseline for you to be able to go back and judge, all these things around that. I mean, I'm engaged on a volunteer basis, with an organization, and there's this whole discussion about, freedom of speech, and I ought to be able to be authentic. And that authenticity has resulted in, people feeling traumatized, people feeling excluded and isolated. And so if that's counter to what your core values are, I want you to be authentic, but you can't be authentic in a destructive way that, presents some significant issues for the people that we care about, on our team. So I think as adults, we got to be more sophisticated about that, and try to create the kind of environment where I don't have to tell you not to wear something that's offensive. You don't want to do it because you don't want to offend other people in our organization. Like, you are thinking about your fellow team members, you're thinking about them and how they feel. And so even though you don't feel that that's what you wore that symbol or whatever it is for, if you understand the impact that it has on other people and you don't want to have that impact on your team members, then you kind of self-select, you kind of, you choose not to do that. That's the ultimate goal. But I think you got to be clear about who you are, who you stand for, and not everybody is a right fit for your organization, period.
Yeah, and when one more kind of question on that, because what I believe is that the outliers are sometimes the loudest, right?
Yeah.
And that's, I think, what organizations are dealing with right now, is that because of the social environment out there, there's a lot of loud outliers that are very extremes on either end. Wherever you want to, whatever topic you want to talk about, right? Most people are somewhere in the gray area middle. They believe this or believe that. But I think organizations really, and I know council culture is kind of a negative term sometimes, but because of the type of environment out there, I think there's a lot of executives and organizations that are afraid to take steps or afraid to make statements because of the potential impact. How do you address that? Just advice on how you address that, not only from the individual executive standpoint, but from the organizational standpoint.
Again, you got to stay true to your values. You got to understand who you are, what you represent. I mean, we're moving into this era where, businesses are saying, look, we always talked about the purpose of a business being, let's make profits. That's the number one goal of a business. We need to rethink this. We have a broader responsibility to not just shareholders, but to stakeholders. And those stakeholders include not only our employees and customers, but the broader community. And so if I have this stakeholder orientation, that's got to tie into what my values are. And if I remain, if this is true for me, and I might have to lose a few customers because of it, hopefully I'm gaining some customers on the other side who feel good about, look, I want to do business with them because of their values. It ain't just because of their product. Their product does the same thing as this other product, but they have the kind of values that are aligned with my values. And so at the very least, you can go to sleep at night feeling good about who you are and what you represent. I mean, I think that's where we have to be. The unfortunate part is that, you talked about the extremes on, both sides of whatever the issue is. And we've gotten in such an environment with social media and the sound bites and everything that people get, is that I think those extremes, those divides are becoming more like in the middle, people are feeling like they have to choose one way or the other. And so we feel even more polarized. I think that's unfortunate. That's why I'm such a big proponent of emotional intelligence. I mean, a lot of that polarization is driven by emotions. And so I think organizations ought to have a robust training program around emotional and social intelligence, so that when these critical, thorny issues come up, that people have the types of skills that they can deal with those conflicts more effectively. But the reality is most people are going to want these problems to go away. If I just don't look, that I won't see them and they'll go away. But I think we're beyond that. I think we're at the point where, fortunately, you're going to have to draw a line in the sand and say, this is who we are and this is who we are not. And you got to make decisions based on that.
Yeah, I totally agree. Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about inequity in the workplace. And I know you've got some perspectives on unconscious bias or bias within the workplace, and how that you alluded to it a little bit earlier, but how that affects the workplace and your employees. So what are can you talk a little bit about the science around bias, and then what are some things that executives can measure to find out, do I have this issue internally, or how bad is it in my organization, or those kinds of things?
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's really eye-opening when you delve into this science. If you think just stereotyping, for instance, now we know that it's a dangerous thing to stereotype and generalize. But the reality is that is what we were designed to do. The human brain is designed to process information as quickly as it possibly can. I mean, we can deal with a lot of stimulus, but there's so much stimuli out there that we get inundated, right? So we got these shortcut mechanisms built into the brain. And when I see somebody, where is that? What do I know? What can I connect this to? And so we create these boxes, and we'll put people in these boxes based on, what they say, what they look like, what they've done. And it's just a way to make sense of the world. And so it serves us well, again, because we can process information. We don't get too inundated, but it's also gets us into trouble, right? Because that process of going through and not guessing and, generalizing about who Mike is based on what he looks like, I got to have a relationship with him. And so it's a balancing act that we have to do. But the most important thing is awareness. So you got to be aware that based on my experiences, I probably have some biases. And regardless of how kind I am, just how nice and sweet I am, if I have limited experiences with people who look different from me or think differently, come from a different background or perspective, if I have little experience with them, I am leaving myself very vulnerable to make generalizations, to have confirmation bias, to stereotype, right? All of this, I don't even know it's happening, but it's just my brain is processing things faster than I'm able to consciously be aware of it. So the answer then is I need experiences with a wide variety of people from a wide variety of backgrounds. If I do that, I've kind of tripped this default mechanism in the brain. I've overridden that default mechanism, and I'm less likely to make the same biased decisions or to have the same kind of stereotypes, because I know dozens of people who look like you, Mike, and they're all different from different backgrounds. So how can I possibly put you in the box, right? So I think understanding some of those default mechanisms, the fact that, with a functional MRI machine, people look at pictures of different faces, and based on those faces and the skin color and all that, we have different levels of activity in the amygdala, the part of the brain that registers fight or flight. That is profound to me. And people will deny it up and I do not. Well, but here's your results. We're looking at your results, and it indicated more activity. So I think this is really an area where I'm hoping HR people will explore more, because if we understand those behaviors, if we understand those default mechanisms, we can start to understand some predictable traps that people can fall into. Now we have some information, right? Now we're armed with some insights, because if we understand those predictable traps, we may be able to get in front of those traps and what do you have to do with little kids sometimes when they're doing the wrong thing? You got to divert them to, focus on something else. Well, look, at work, and I'm not trying to offend anybody specifically because I'm the same way, we're all just big little kids when it comes to certain issues. We don't necessarily have the maturity to deal with some of these issues because we haven't had much practice with it. So some of the same strategies that work when we're trying to divert our little ones, we kind of need to do at work as well.
I think that's great advice. I agree with that. One of the things as you were talking that popped into my head, I'm a big sports guy, right? And analytics have really taken over sports because those unconscious bias that you're talking about exist, right? You look at somebody and, height, weight, whatever skill level, and you think, well, they should be a great player or they should be a great hitter. Baseball is one that's really taken on analytics. It's not necessarily true if you look at the numbers, right? But if you're an HR executive and you're dealing with people within the workplace, there is a people part of it where you don't want to just look at numbers and be very analytical because people are people, right? How do you deal with the idea that unconscious bias, like you said, it's ingrained in us, it's part of who we are, and there is a connection point with those kinds of gut feels and those kinds of things versus just looking at numbers and saying, hey, these numbers tell me that this is what it is. How do you resolve that within an organization to be a people person yet try to address those unconscious bias?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think there are a couple ways to do it. First of all, we've learned even in sports that the team that spends the most money on analytics is not necessarily the team that wins the championship, right? So I think you got to use the data as part, of the information when you're making a decision. So if you have the combination of this data as well as the eye test from somebody with a whole lot of experience, and you put those two together, I think you have an opportunity to make a much better decision. Similarly, in organizations, HR people now have at their disposal lots of data. I mean, we have sentiment analysis. They get at people's emotions now. We have all this data that we can draw insights from. But you still need the background and experience. You still need the exposure from people from different backgrounds to lessen the likelihood that you're bringing these biases or that managers are bringing these biases. So HR people are a few things we can do. Number one, what if we create opportunities within my company for people to get out of their comfort zones where they're not just going to lunch with people who are just like them, that they're not just working on teams, voluntary teams, with people who look just like them. How do we create experiences in the workplace that give people an opportunity to engage with people who are different than them in some significant way? So that's one thing. We're retraining the brain when we do that. That's one thing. Another thing is there are lots of technologies that now on the front end can alert us to some biases. There's technology that can say, look, when you give feedback to women, you always use these kind of words. When you give feedback to men, you use these kind of words. These kind of words, and their connotations are very different. Maybe you should think about saying it differently. There are tools that can help us do that. So using technology to help us is another strategy. And the other thing is, if I'm aware that I have some potential biases, when I'm making decisions, maybe I don't make them alone. Maybe when we're interviewing this candidate, we use a panel, a diverse panel, so that people from different perspectives get a chance to weigh in. And so now any biases that I might have get balanced, right, with everybody else's perspective. So, but that starts with being self-aware and understanding that I could have some biases that I'm not aware of. So how do I put mechanisms in place that will decrease the likelihood that those biases affect my decisions?
Oh, that's great advice. And I know that you at UKG, you put together an Equity at Work Council. Can you talk a little bit about the goals and objectives of that group?
We'll do. We're very excited about this. This has been something that's been in my head for probably a decade. But as you can tell from how I talk, I'm very interested in the science of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And 14 years ago now, when I was working on my dissertation study, that included some aspects of emotional intelligence and understanding intercultural sensitivity, I found that we knew a lot about people in pockets, in certain silos. So anthropologists had something to say, sociologists had something to say, economists had something to say, but there was not a lot of information sharing across disciplines. I thought that was a real challenge. And so one of the things that we've done is we formally introduced this Equity at Work Council, where we're bringing people from different disciplines together to talk about the science of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. So we have researchers who are doing studies on a day-to-day basis that we're engaging in this whole process. We are creating an index, a measurement tool, an assessment tool that organizations can use to figure out where they are relative to their progress in diversity, equity, and inclusion. One feature that we're working to get integrated into this tool is some kind of a gap analysis, this reality score, so to speak, that says, okay, you've gotten some recognition as been a great company for diversity, and you check a lot of the boxes in terms of your demographics and your representation and pay equity and all that stuff. But when I interview people in underrepresented groups, they tell me that they don't feel like they're treated equally, that they have some issues. And so there's a disconnect between how you look on paper and people's lived experiences. So we're trying to find out, if we can measure what that disconnect is and give people some kind of advice about how to close that gap. And we also will do a couple studies, 2-3 studies every year on some aspect of the science of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We have a mechanism to bring thought leaders together who do DE, and B work on a day-to-day basis, so they can do some idea exchange and host webinars, webcasts for us. And then we also have a practice group. You might be a person who, I'm an HR person, haven't had any training in diversity, but now, because of all the stuff that has happened, I've been told I need to do something about diversity. I don't know what to do. So we're trying to create a mechanism for people to connect and share some best practices there as well. And finally, we have a social room where anybody can log in and just weigh in on how they feel about these issues, equity in the workplace and society. So we're really excited about the Equity at Work Council and what we're trying to accomplish with it.
Thanks, Jarek. And for those of you listening out there, if you have some interest, we'll be sending out links and more information on that, so you connect up with Jarek. One of the questions, going back a little bit, that came in, you talked about the importance of emotional intelligence training, and the core values of a company. And the question was, other than the emotional intelligence training, what are some other things that executives can do or companies can do to help establish those core values or communicate those core values? Is it a matter of just keeping them on the radar and keep saying them, or is there other things that can be done to help with that?
Everything needs to be linked to them, right? How you measure performance, how you bring people into your organization, how you assess whether or not they are the kind of people that you want working for the organization. Like if diversity and inclusion is your core value, which most people by now have adopted some form of that as a core value. Yet when people do their screening processes and they're interviewing people, they might ask them, "Oh, is this important to you?" What are they going to say? Yes, it is. Absolutely, it is. How about asking them, give me an example in your life or in your previous experience that shows how important diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging are to you. And now they got to tell you something, right? They got to talk about something that they've done. And so we got to screen for this, right? In a more sophisticated way than we're doing now. And here's the other thing. We know what the demographics are as you go up the ladder in most organizations, in most industries. People spend time really interacting with people who often look like them, who come from similar backgrounds, who share similar values, et cetera. It's very hard to not have some blind spots. So I think executives, starting with the CEO, needs to find some ways to get out and interact in some meaningful ways with people who don't look like them, with people who don't come from backgrounds that they do, who don't think like them. I think that experience of what that feels like, what that is, would be very valuable for people who don't get it. Because if you don't intentionally seek that kind of experience, as you rise up the ladder, you don't necessarily get it.
Yeah, and so we have time for one more question and ask you to put your philosophical hat on here. So,
Ah,
well,
okay.
2020 has been a challenging year to say the least, right?
Yeah.
Is there anything that you look at that has been a 2020 change, from where we started this year, that you look at and say, I hope that stays the same in 2021? Is there anything, other than, we mentioned a little bit about the awareness of some of these things, so maybe that's one, but is there anything else that you look and say, even though this was rough, I hope this stays the same, or I hope this was a step forward in the right direction.
Well, personally, I love live audiences, right? I love being on stage and being able to see the body language and interact, etc. But it's been nice not traveling. And so I hope that more people in the future are open to this kind of format, even if there's an ability to do a live audience. So I hope there's an opportunity to maybe have an immersion, kind of a program, so that people like me may be able to spend more nights at home with my family. So that's a personal thing that I hope. I hope there's more options not to have to travel. I love being in different places. I just don't like getting there. So that's part of it. I think, um, from a workplace perspective, one of the things, and somebody was just talking about it in a previous meeting, is that because we are in people's homes, we get a chance to see their homes. We've met family members, we've met spouses, we've met kids, and so we've had a chance to deepen the relationship with employees a bit more because we've seen them in their element more. So I hope we keep that. I hope we keep that connection and that recognition that people are more than just workers. They have a lot of other things going on, and we've gotten a little bit of a glimpse into that. So I hope there's some way that we can make sure that we know these are real people with full lives, and for us to be engaged in that life in some meaningful way. I think it's important.
Thanks, Jarek. And along the travel lines, I agree with you on that. And I'm hoping that the middle seats on airlines never come back, right? That's a
Absolutely.
fantastic
Absolutely.
concept around the situation. So thank you so much again for joining us. Your insights are fascinating. I appreciate your support and KG support. So thank you again. And for next week, we have a session on next Wednesday along the PDXYZ series, the role and perspective of the HR role in 2020. And we have another session on December 11th. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Jarek, thank you so much for joining us as well. And I hope you all have a great afternoon, great evening.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, everybody. Everybody take care.
Thank you.